Pinned down in a valley, a young Marine's last hope crackled over the radio. Command was still scrambling for air support, until a calm voice said, "She's already flying." Minutes later, Captain Sophie Iron Wing Daniels changed everything. "Before we begin, let me know in the comments where you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel." The late afternoon sun washed the tarmac in gold, its heat rising in faint ripples off the concrete. Out near the far end of the airbase, Captain Sophie Iron Wing Daniels crouched beside the front landing gear of her A-10 Thunderbolt II, running her palm along the weathered paint. The Warthog's skin bore the faint scuffs of past missions, each one a reminder of the bird's resilience. She wore her flight suit half-zipped, sleeves tied at the waist, revealing a plain gray t-shirt darkened with grease at the shoulders. A torque wrench rested beside her boot. She'd been here most of the day, moving from inspection to inspection with the unhurried patience of someone who refused to cut corners. To Sophie, a combat aircraft wasn't just a machine. It was a partner. And partners needed to be ready before the fight ever came. Across the airfield, the control tower loomed against a cloudless sky. Inside the operations building, Colonel Martin Steele stood at the window, watching her. "She's still out there fussing over that jet," he muttered to himself before turning toward his desk. His voice was low but edged with the authority of someone used to being obeyed. Major Ben Foster, leaning casually in the doorway with a mug of coffee, followed the colonel's gaze. "That's not fussing, sir. That's SOP for Sophie. You know how she is, won't take a single sortie until she's sure the hog's purring." Steele frowned. "My concern isn't whether her bird purrs. It's whether she should even be on high-risk missions anymore." He tapped a folder on his desk, its edges worn from being opened too often. "We've got younger pilots itching to get in the fight. Sophie's done her part." Ben's jaw tightened. "With respect, sir, if there's a CAS mission in bad weather, low altitude, heavy armor involved, you want Sophie. She's not just another stick in a cockpit. She's the one who brings everyone home." Steele didn't answer right away. He turned back to the window, watching Sophie climb onto the ladder to check the gun port of the GAU-8 Avenger cannon. Sunlight caught the edge of her hair where it escaped from her cap. "She's been through enough," Steele said finally. "Sometimes the hardest call is to take a good one out of the rotation before something happens." Ben set the coffee down on the edge of Steele's desk with deliberate care. "Or sometimes the hardest call is to admit the good one's still your best shot." Outside, Sophie lowered herself from the ladder, boots thumping softly on the tarmac. She wiped her hands on a rag and glanced toward the ops building, half expecting to see Ben heading her way. She wasn't wrong. He strode across the apron, coffee in hand, the faint smirk on his face signaling that he'd just been in an argument, probably one she'd been at the center of. "Thought you might need a caffeine resupply," he said, holding out the mug. Sophie accepted it with a nod. "I've got a thermos in the hangar." "Yeah, but mine's stronger. And doesn't taste like it came out of a survival kit." She took a sip, savoring the bitter heat. "What's the word?" Ben glanced at the A-10's wings, lined with hardpoints. "Word is, things are getting noisier up front. Couple of armored units spotted moving west of the line. Could just be posturing. Could be something else." Sophie set the mug on the wing root and leaned against the fuselage, eyes narrowing slightly. "You don't think they're just stretching their legs?" Ben shook his head. "Feels different. But command's still calling it routine. You know how it is, they don't sound the alarm until they hear the shells whistling overhead." She didn't smile, but there was a flicker of dry humor in her tone. "Guess that's why we keep the hogs fed and ready." Ben studied her a moment. "You ever think about slowing down? Taking a desk?" Sophie's answer was immediate, steady. "Flying's the one thing I do that makes sense of all the rest. You want me at a desk, you're gonna have to tie me to it." He chuckled, but it was cut short by a burst of static from the portable radio clipped to Sophie's belt. "Breaker, this is Tex and Comms," came a familiar drawl over the channel. "Got a little chatter you might want to hear." Ben raised an eyebrow. "What's our favorite Texan got?" Sophie unhooked the radio, pressing the talk key. Go ahead, Texas. Picked up some forward recon chatter on the secure net. Armor on the move again, bigger group this time. Could be nothing, but his voice trailed off, the pause waited with unspoken possibility. Sophie and Ben exchanged a glance. Tex's voice came back, softer now. I'll keep an ear on it. Just feels like they're getting ready for something. The air between them seemed to shift, the lazy rhythm of the afternoon replaced by a quiet tension. Sophie glanced back at her A-10, its shark mouth paint grinning in the low sun. Somewhere out there, trouble was rolling closer. The morning haze still clung to the low hills as Lieutenant Marcus Doyle led his Marines along a narrow dirt track winding through the valley. The air was cool, still carrying the scent of last night's rain. Mud clung to boots, and the distant call of some bird echoed off the rocky slopes. It was supposed to be a routine sweep, check the valley floor for signs of enemy infiltration, make sure the supply road that cut through the pass stayed clear. Doyle kept his pace steady, scanning both ridgelines out of habit more than suspicion. Feels too quiet, muttered Corporal Sam Grizz Donnelly behind him, adjusting the weight of his pack. Quiet's good, Doyle replied, keeping his eyes ahead. Means we get back in time for chow without anyone bleeding. The platoon's chatter was light, the kind that came when men had been on enough patrols to believe today would be like all the others. A few traded jokes about the coffee back at base. One Marine hummed a country tune off-key. The valley narrowed, the walls closing in. Doyle gave a hand signal for tighter spacing. His radio operator, Private Lang, was a step behind, the long antenna swaying with each stride. That was when Doyle felt it, a faint vibration under his boots. He stopped mid-step, frowning, and raised a fist. The column halted. You feel that? Grizz whispered. The vibration deepened. In the still morning, it was unmistakable, the low, steady rumble of heavy engines. Doyle's stomach tightened. He swung his binoculars up, scanning the western ridgeline. Through a break in the brush, sunlight caught on something, flat, dark, and unmistakably metallic. Contact, contact. Doyle barked. Armor, 2 o'clock. As if answering his call, the sound swelled. Over the ridge, the first enemy tank crested into view, its cannon swinging toward the valley floor. Behind it, shapes multiplied, armored personnel carriers, painted in camouflage that blended too well with the hills. The first shell landed short, a plume of dirt erupting just ahead of the Marines. Shouts filled the air as Doyle's men dove for cover behind the meager rocks and scrub. Lang! Doyle snapped, crawling to the radio operator. Get me command. Now! Lang was already twisting the dial, his voice sharp and clipped as he called the forward command post. Doyle took the handset. This is Red 3 in Valley Pass. We have multiple enemy armor units closing in from the west. We are pinned and outgunned. Request immediate air support, over. Static crackled, then a voice from base replied, tense but measured, Red 3, copy your position. Stand by. We're scrambling assets. Stand by. Doyle muttered bitterly. Another shell slammed into the slope above, showering them with dirt and rock. We don't have time to stand by. At the airbase, alarms began to sound in the operations building. Colonel Martin Steele strode into the command room, his expression hard. What VE we got? He demanded. A duty officer pointed to the tactical display, where red markers swarmed along the valley's western edge. Enemy armored column, sir. At least 4 tanks, multiple APCs. Red 3's in the kill zone. Where's my air cover? Steele barked. Nearest F-16s are on another sortie. 2 Apaches out for maintenance. The A-10 crews are either on training flights or still in prep, the officer finished reluctantly. We're getting birds ready, but... Steele turned sharply toward the map. He knew how long it would take to scramble a fresh crew, get them airborne, and reach the valley. Too long. Send in the QRF by ground, he ordered, even as he knew they'd never make it in time. He paced once, hands clasped behind his back. We need a miracle. Back in the valley, the Marines were fighting to hold a thin defensive line. Doyle's squad was split between two clusters of rocks, machine guns chattering in short bursts to keep the APCs at bay. Grizz crouched beside Doyle, firing his M4 between words. "Any word on that air support?" "They're scrambling," Doyle said through clenched teeth. He didn't add the part he knew. Scrambling meant minutes they didn't have. The tanks advanced, treads grinding the earth. The APCs deployed enemy infantry, who began working their way along the valley floor. The sound of gunfire bounced between the walls, each echo a reminder of how boxed in they were. Doyle ducked behind cover as another tank round screamed overhead. "Come on, command," he muttered under his breath. "Get me something with wings." In the command room, the tension was thick. Officers hovered over radios, technicians updated the map display. Steele stared at the clock on the wall, calculating the gap between now and when the first friendly aircraft could arrive. "That's if nothing goes wrong," the duty officer said, reading his thoughts. Steele exhaled through his nose, his voice dropping into a low growl meant more for himself than the room. "We need a miracle out there." A familiar, lazy drawl cut through the chatter from one of the comm consoles. Sergeant Tommy Tex Caldwell, headset slightly askew, swiveled in his chair toward the colonel. "Sir," he said, almost grinning, "hate to break it to you, but she's already flying." The A-10 Thunderbolt II cut through the thin morning cloud, its twin turbofans humming with a steady confidence. Inside the cockpit, Captain Sophie Iron Wing Daniels sat with her hands loose on the stick, eyes scanning between the horizon and the tactical display. Her breathing was even, each inhale matched to the rhythm of the aircraft's vibrations. The outside world blurred into a single mission line, a valley marked in red on her HUD, a column of enemy armor advancing toward friendlies. She'd been in the air for 20 minutes already, running a training hop along the border. It was no accident. Ever since the last week's uptick in enemy activity, Sophie had taken to flying with full loadouts under the guise of practice runs. The radio crackled in her helmet. Chief Warrant Officer Ray Morales, voice rough and skeptical, came over the Joint Ops channel. "Iron Wing, this is Viper 2. You're the only CAS bird we've got inbound?" "Over." Sophie keyed her mic, eyes still on the distance ahead. "Affirmative. One hog, full payload, ETA 4 mics to the fight." There was a pause, a faint hiss of static before Morales came back, tone edged with doubt. "You're looking at multiple tanks, APCs, and infantry. Not sure one pilot can make the difference here." Sophie didn't blink. Her voice was level, clipped. "Watch me." Below, the valley came into sharper view, a long, rocky bowl with the road snaking through its center. Smoke drifted from shell impacts. Tiny flashes of muzzle fire winked in and out along the slopes. Her left hand adjusted the throttle while her right tapped the targeting control. She ran through the checklist: Mavericks armed, rockets primed, GAU-8 cannon hot. The memory came unbidden. Another valley, years ago, her flight delayed by weather, arriving just in time to see friendly vehicles burning. That image had never left her. Today would not be a repeat. On the ground, Lieutenant Marcus Doyle ducked behind a boulder as a tank round exploded 50 meters to his left. Dirt and rock pelted his helmet. "Lang! Tell command they'd better have something in the air or we're done here," he shouted. Lang's voice was almost drowned out by the gunfire. "They say they've got an A-10 inbound." Doyle risked a glance over the rock. "One? Just one?" Another Marine fired a burst down the road toward advancing infantry. Doyle could barely hear his own thoughts over the roar of the tanks and the hiss-crack of incoming rounds. In the cockpit, Sophie listened to the overlapping calls on the net. Doyle's voice cut through the chaos, tight, urgent, on the edge of breaking. She banked left to approach from the east, where the rising sun would glare into the enemy's optics. The A-10's wings tipped, revealing the lethal silhouette of its underwing stores, AGM-65 Mavericks, Hydra rocket pods, and the unmistakable 30mm cannon muzzle grinning from the nose. Morales' voice returned, this time more focused. "Iron Wing, Viper 2 is 3 clicks south. Prepping for pickup if you can clear us a path. Copy, Viper 2, Sophie said, lining up her first run in her mind. I'll make them look the other way. She adjusted her heading, the terrain rushing beneath her. The targeting reticle locked onto the lead tank in the column. Distance, 1,200 meters. Back on the valley floor, Doyle's men clung to cover. Grizz, kneeling behind a boulder, popped up to fire at enemy infantry edging closer to their position. He barely got 2 shots off before a sharp crack split the air and he went down hard. Grizz is hit, someone yelled. Doyle crawled to him under fire. The corporal was pale, blood seeping between his fingers where he clutched his side. Hold on, we've got air coming. Doyle shouted, pressing a field dressing into the wound. Grizz managed a faint grin through gritted teeth. Hope they hurry. Above them, Sophie rolled level and pushed her throttle forward. The Hog's nose dipped slightly as she lined up the GAU-8's firing solution. From her altitude, she could see the entire engagement, Marines scattered among rocks, enemy armor pushing steadily forward, Morales' helicopter hovering beyond the ridgeline waiting for a gap. The whole battlefield felt like a clock winding down toward zero. Her thumb hovered over the trigger. In the quiet of the cockpit, with alarms still silent, she let the crosshairs settle, her breathing slow, heart steady. She wasn't here to hold the line. She was here to end the threat before it swallowed Doyle's men whole. Back at Doyle's position, the gunfire intensified. Enemy infantry had found new angles, rounds chipping away at the Marines' cover. Lang's radio blared with fragmented updates, none of them promising. Doyle looked at Grizz, whose eyes were starting to glaze. He grabbed the handset, nearly yelling into it over the chaos. This is Red 3. We are pinned and taking casualties. If your bird is out there, now's the time. The net erupted with overlapping voices, command relays, Morales calling positions, techs feeding updates from the base. Through it all, Doyle's urgency sharpened into something desperate. Because if Sophie didn't make her move in the next minute, it wouldn't matter who was inbound. The sun was just beginning its slide toward the horizon when Sophie crested the ridgeline. From her A-10's cockpit, the landscape opened up in a breathtaking sweep, and then narrowed into a deadly picture. The valley below was chaos. Black plumes rose from burning vehicles, the flat echo of gunfire bouncing off the slopes, the sudden flash of tank barrels as enemy armor moved in coordinated, merciless lines toward the pinned Marines. Her thumb hovered over the weapons control. The GAU-8 Avenger cannon waited, 7 barrels of justice spinning at her command. Visual on the lead armor, Sophie's voice was low, steady in her helmet mic. Copy, Iron Wing. You are cleared hot, came the clipped reply from the forward air controller. It was Doyle's voice, tight with adrenaline but holding on to discipline. Sophie's breathing slowed. The moment before impact was always silent in her mind. Then, with the same calm she'd had on the tarmac that morning, she rolled the A-10 into position. The first burst from the cannon ripped across the valley like a storm breaking. The lead tank shuddered under the strike, then erupted in flame. The second took 2 short bursts before its engine compartment blew, thick smoke curling skyward. Below, Marines who had been crouched behind rocks and dirt embankments lifted their heads, disbelief turning into a rallying yell. This is Doyle to all call signs, Iron Wings in the fight. Move to extraction point Alpha. The battlefield shifted in an instant. Where there had been creeping dread, there was now motion, boots pounding dirt, men pulling their wounded toward the waiting hilltop where they could be lifted out. But the enemy adapted fast. APCs swung their turrets toward the ridge, spitting tracer fire into the air. Sophie jinked hard right, feeling the A-10's weight respond like an extension of her own body. Armor-piercing rounds ripped past, some pinging against her fuselage. Copy hits, still green, she reported calmly, eyes flicking to her systems panel. The Warthog could take more punishment than most aircraft on Earth, but she had no interest in testing its limits unnecessarily. Through the static, a new voice cut in. This is Talon 2, inbound from the south. ETA 30 seconds. It was Morales, his helicopter skimming low through the canyons like a hawk hunting prey. Sophie could hear the skepticism in his tone even without seeing his face. Hope you soften them up enough, Iron Wing. Hope you're ready to keep up, Talon 2, she replied, rolling into another pass. Watch the ridge, enemy armor regrouping at your 3 o'clock. Her cannon barked again, shredding a line of infantry attempting to flank Doyle's Marines. The sudden strike bought the pinned unit another 30 seconds, precious time that meant the difference between evacuation and a body bag. Morales arrived like thunder, rotor wash scattering dust and debris in wide circles. His door gunners opened up immediately, chewing through the smaller armored vehicles trying to push forward. In her canopy reflection, Sophie caught the silhouette of his bird swinging into position, covering a wide arc around the Marines. Tracer rounds stitched the ground between her and Morales, forcing both aircraft to adjust. Sophie switched to Mavericks, locking onto a tank that had slipped into the shadow of a bluff. A shrill tone confirmed target lock, and the missile leapt free, slamming into the tank's armor with a fireball that lit the canyon walls. Good hit, Morales admitted, a hint of grudging respect in his voice. Thanks, Talon 2. Keep your boys moving. I've got another run in me before I bingo fuel. On the ground, Doyle's voice cut in again, breathless. Iron Wing, they're zeroing us. Grizz is hit bad, we need that corridor clear now. Sophie adjusted her heading, eyes scanning for the bottleneck blocking their path. She spotted it, 2 tanks nose to nose on the trail, with infantry fanned out like a living barricade. I've got your door, she told Doyle, then to Morales, we're going to carve it, top to bottom. I'll take lead, you sweep behind. Morales didn't argue this time. Copy, Iron Wing. I'm on your 6. She dipped low, hugging the valley floor, the ground a blur beneath her wings. The Marine's position was closing fast, tracer lines stitching the air in a deadly web. Sophie's finger tightened and the infantry line disintegrated, scattering in all directions. She swung wide, giving Morales the lane he needed. Without another word, his helicopter swept in behind her, gunners laying down suppressive fire that kept the enemy's heads down. Above the roar of his rotors and the chattering guns, Sophie could almost feel the ground troops surging forward through the opening. The ridge shook with explosions as she pulled up for altitude again, scanning for any stragglers. The Marines were moving, the extraction point coming into view. Doyle's voice came through again, relief flooding his words even as the fight raged on. Sophie didn't need to respond. She and Morales were in sync now, 2 predators circling, cutting, driving the enemy back inch by inch. They didn't need to speak to understand the next move. The valley should have been quiet by now. Smoke from burning armor drifted into the sky, and for a moment it looked like the fight was over. But Sophie knew better, wars didn't end with smoke, they ended with certainty. Through the canopy of her A-10C, she caught flashes of movement in the tree line ahead. Infrared sensors confirmed it, enemy armor and troops regrouping, pushing hard to choke off Doyle's route to extraction. She could almost feel their intent, the way a predator circles prey. Doyle, this is Iron Wing, she called, her voice steady despite the adrenaline pounding through her veins. You've got more armor inbound, closing fast. They're trying to box you in. On the ground, Doyle's reply was ragged. We can't outmaneuver them, Captain. We're too spread out, and Grizz, he's bleeding bad. We need that road clear. Sophie rolled her shoulders, scanning her ammo readout. Not much left. A handful of 30mm bursts, a couple of rockets. Every shot would have to count. From overhead, Morales's UH-60 Black Hawk cut across the valley, his voice sharp over the comms. Iron Wing, you've got maybe 2 minutes before they cut your Marines off. You can't hit them all. Watch me, Sophie replied, though her own eyes flicked to her fuel gauge. One more pass would push her limits, fuel, ammo, and maybe the aircraft's integrity. She pitched the nose of the Warthog down, the engine's low growl building to a familiar rumble. The ground below opened like a map, tanks, troop carriers, the narrow stretch of road Doyle's men were fighting to hold. Her first burst ripped into the lead APC, tearing it apart in a chain of fire and steel. The BRRRT of the GAU-8 cannon thundered across the valley, echoing off the ridges. Marines scrambled forward under the cover of her strike, moving wounded and returning fire. But the enemy had learned from the first engagement. Tracer rounds clawed at the sky, and a heat seeker hissed past her right wing, close enough that the cockpit shuddered from its wake. She banked hard, countermeasures flaring. "Missile, missile, missile!" Morales shouted. "I see it," Sophie replied, breath tight. Another flare, another turn, the A-10's wings groaning under the strain. Her hands were steady, but then the jolt came. A deafening thunk and shiver ran through the airframe. Warning lights flared on her console, a red indicator flashing for the starboard wing. "Talk to me, Iron Wing," Ben's voice came from base, sharper than she'd heard all day. "Wings damaged, but I'm still flying," she said, making the words sound easier than they were. The A-10's reputation for surviving punishment was well earned, but every pilot knew there was a point where grit couldn't hold metal together. She climbed, giving herself space, scanning for the last obstacle between Doyle and freedom. There it was, a tank squatting on the road like a sentinel, its turret turning toward the Marines' escape route. One chance. That was all. She lined up the shot, breathing slow, letting the reticle settle despite the shaking in the controls. "Morales, clear me a lane," she said. "Roger that," Morales replied, banking low and drawing enemy fire with his Black Hawk. "You've got 10 seconds before I'm out of your path." Her heartbeat slowed to match the rhythm of her breathing. She thought of the hangar back home, of the quiet mornings with her hands on the cool skin of the Warthog, and of every time she'd promised herself she'd never miss when it mattered. "Guns hot," she said aloud, to no one in particular. She dove. The tank filled her targeting scope, and then the valley erupted with the roar of the GAU-8. The rounds struck in a molten line, tearing through armor. The turret erupted in a blossom of fire, the tank's frame shuddering before it collapsed in on itself. "Target down," she called. On the ground, Doyle's voice carried relief and urgency in equal measure. "That's our gap, moving now." The Marines poured down the road, carrying Grizz between them, every boot hitting dirt like a drumbeat. Overhead, Sophie pulled up sharply, the A-10's wounded wing protesting. She could feel the sluggishness in her controls, but she kept her eyes on the Marines until the first ones reached the LZ where Morales's helicopter hovered. "Coming in hot," Morales warned. His Black Hawk settled just enough for Doyle's men to pile in, the rotor wash scattering dust and ash. The last Marine staggered aboard, Doyle himself, and Morales pulled the Black Hawk skyward, banking toward safety. In Sophie's cockpit, the adrenaline eased just enough for her to take a breath. Her Warthog was still flying. The Marines were alive. And for the first time all day, the valley below was quiet. The sun was dipping low over the desert when the helicopters finally appeared on the horizon. Their rotors thumped against the cooling air, carrying the battered remnants of Doyle's Marines. Dust swirled in the landing zone as Morales eased his bird down, the ramp dropping to reveal faces smeared with grime, eyes heavy with exhaustion, and all still alive. Grizz was the last off. A corpseman half-guided, half-carried him toward the waiting medics. His arm was in a makeshift sling, and his uniform was torn where shrapnel had grazed him, but he was smiling, a wide, almost disbelieving grin. The medics loaded him onto a stretcher, his hand raised in a small wave toward Doyle before he was whisked away. Doyle stepped onto the tarmac, his legs stiff after hours in that cramped helicopter bay. He spotted Colonel Steele standing a short distance away, arms folded. The colonel's face was carved in stone, unreadable. Doyle limped over, his voice rough from dust and adrenaline. "She saved every one of us," Doyle said simply. No dramatics, no embellishment, just truth. For a moment, Steele didn't answer. He only looked past Doyle, toward the far end of the runway where an A-10C sat cooling in the fading light, paint scorched on one side, a ragged tear in the left wing where enemy fire had found her. The maintenance crew was already crawling over her, but the pilot's seat was empty. Sophie had climbed down minutes earlier, helmet tucked under her arm. She moved slowly, every step deliberate, like the weight of the mission had only now caught up to her. Morales was beside her, still running on the hum of battle. Thought you couldn't fly through that mess, he said with a half grin. I didn't, Sophie replied, glancing at the scar along her wing. The Warthog did. I just pointed her in the right direction. Tex jogged over from the comm shack, his ever-present ball cap now dusty and sweat-stained. Ma'am, he said, a touch of awe in his drawl, I reckon they'll be talking about today for a long while. Sophie only nodded, eyes scanning the ramp where Doyle's men were gathering for transport to the infirmary. Every single one accounted for. That was all that mattered. Steele finally walked toward her. The ground crew stepped aside instinctively. He stopped a few feet away, his shadow long in the orange light. For a long moment, he simply studied her, the smudges of oil and soot on her cheeks, the faint tremor in her hand where it rested against the fuselage. No speech. No formal commendation. Just a slow, deliberate nod. It was more than approval. It was acknowledgement, the kind that came from a commander who'd doubted her, and now knew without question that when the call came, Captain Sophie Iron Wing Daniels had already been flying. If Sophie's courage in the skies moved you, don't let her story end here. Subscribe for more true-to-life tales of grit, duty, and impossible odds. And if you served, or know someone who did, share this with them. Every hero deserves to be remembered.